Madison Square Garden, New York City, October 1974. The air inside the arena was thick with cigar smoke, expensive perfume, and an electric tension that you could almost taste. This was the main event, the televised concert that was supposed to mark the ultimate return of the king. 20,000 people were screaming, flashing bulbs were popping like lightning storms, and the world was watching. But backstage, in the dressing room, the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra, was pacing like a caged tiger. He snapped at his valise, adjusted his bow tie for the 10th time, and stared into the mirror with a look that wasn't confidence. It was fear. He turned to Jilly Rizzo, his closest confidant, and asked a question that didn't make sense to anyone else in the room. "Is he here, Jilly? Did you get him in?" Jilly nodded solemnly. "He's here, boss. Row 1. But he looks tired, Frank." Frank took a deep swig of Jack Daniels, his blue eyes hardening. He doesn't need to look good. He just needs to hear it. That night, the world expected Frank Sinatra to sing for the cameras, for the critics, for the legacy. But Frank was planning to sing for a ghost from his past, a man whose name had been erased from history, but without whom the voice would never have existed. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? To understand why the most famous man on the planet was trembling before a concert in 1974, we have to go back 50 years. We have to go back to the cobblestone streets of Hoboken, New Jersey in the mid-1920s. It was a gritty, loud, industrial town where the smell of yeast from the breweries mixed with the coal smoke from the docks. Little Frank was a skinny, wiry kid with scarred ears and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Hudson River. He was the son of Dolly Sinatra, a force of nature who ran the local ward politics, and Marty, a quiet boxer who owned a tavern. Frank was drowning in a world of tough guys and loud noises, feeling like an alien in his own home. He had a voice, yes, but it was thin, untrained, and desperate. He wanted to be someone. He wanted to escape the shadow of the docks. But nobody in Hoboken had time for a skinny kid's dreams. Nobody except a man who lived in the basement of a tenement building on Monroe Street. His name was Leo Pellegrino. Leo was an old piano player, a man with yellowed fingers from cheap tobacco and a face that looked like a crumpled map of Italy. Legend had it he once played for the opera houses in Milan before the Great War broke his spirit and sent him to America, where he ended up playing in speakeasies for mobsters until the whiskey dried up. Now he was just Old Man Leo, the guy who yelled at kids to keep it down. But one afternoon, running from a group of neighborhood bullies, 10-year-old Frank hid in the alleyway near Leo's basement window. He heard something that stopped him cold. It wasn't just piano music. It was a sound that wept. Leo was playing a Puccini aria, playing it with such delicate, shattering sadness that Frank forgot about the bullies. He forgot about the cold. He crept closer to the window. When the music stopped, a gruff voice called out from the darkness, "Don't just stand there breathing like a dying horse, kid. Come in or get lost." Frank went in. That afternoon, in a room that smelled of garlic and old sheet music, Leo Pellegrino looked at the skinny boy and saw the hunger in those bright blue eyes. "You like music?" Leo grunted. Frank nodded. "I want to sing, Mr. Leo. I want to sing like Bing Crosby." Leo laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Crosby croons. You got too much fire in your belly to just croon. Sit down." If you love stories about the hidden history of legends, make sure to subscribe for new stories so you don't miss the next chapter. The lessons began that winter, but they weren't what Frank expected. Leo didn't teach him scales. He didn't teach him how to read music. He taught him how to breathe. He made Frank run around the block until his lungs burned, then made him recite lyrics without taking a breath. "The voice is wind, Francesco," Leo would say, tapping Frank's chest with a ruler. "If you break the wind, you break the spell. You must swim underwater when you sing." For years, while other boys were playing stickball, Frank was in that basement, learning the secret of the legato, the smooth, unbroken line. But Leo taught him something more dangerous than technique. He taught him about silence. One rainy Tuesday, Frank was trying to belt out a song, shouting the notes to prove his power. Leo slammed the piano lid shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Stop!" the old man roared. "You are screaming. Any fool can scream. Silence, Francesco. The emotion lives in the silence between the notes. You have to break your own heart to let the audience see theirs." He grabbed Frank by the collar. "Don't sing the words. Sing the ache. Sing what you can't say to your father. Sing what you're scared of." It was the first time anyone had given Frank permission to be vulnerable. That day, Frank sang not for fame, but to get the pain out of his chest. When he finished, he saw Leo wipe a single tear from his cheek. "Now," Leo whispered, "now you are dangerous." By 1935, Frank was making moves. He joined the Hoboken Four, he won on the Major Bowes Amateur Hour, and eventually he landed the gig at the Rustic Cabin. He was becoming a local star. He would visit Leo less and less. The bright lights of Manhattan were calling across the river. In 1939, 1959, Harry James hired him. Then, the big one, Tommy Dorsey. Frank Sinatra became the phenomenon. The Bobby Soxers, the riots at the Paramount, the screaming girls, it was a mania the world had never seen. He was the Sultan of Swoon. He was sending money back to Hoboken, moving his parents to a better house. But in the whirlwind of fame, the visits to the basement on Monroe Street stopped completely. Leo Pellegrino became a memory, a dusty chapter in a book Frank thought he had finished writing. But gravity has a way of catching up with soaring stars. By the early 1950s, the dream had turned into a nightmare. Frank's vocal cords hemorrhaged during a show at the Copacabana. He lost his voice. His volatile marriage to Ava Gardner was destroying him publicly and privately. The press, who once worshipped him, now called him washed up, a has-been. He was dropped by his record label. His agent couldn't get him a booking in a cafeteria, let alone a concert hall. One freezing night in 1952, Frank found himself walking through Times Square. He looked up at the marquee of the Paramount Theater, where he had once caused riots. Now, it was Eddie Fisher's name in lights. Frank stood there, collar turned up against the wind, feeling a hollowness so deep it terrified him. He walked back to his empty apartment, poured a drink, and stared at the gas oven in his kitchen. The despair was a physical weight. In that silence, in the terrifying quiet of a career that seemed dead, he heard a voice in his head. It wasn't his mother's screaming. It wasn't the critics. It was a raspy Italian accent. The emotion lives in the silence, Francesco. When the voice is tired, the heart must speak. Frank slammed the glass down. He realized he had been trying to be the voice for so long that he forgot to be the man. He remembered Leo's lesson about the ache. He didn't need to be the boy singer anymore. He needed to be the man who had lost everything. This realization was the spark that led to his role in From Here to Eternity. It was the spark that led to his signing with Capitol Records. He changed his style. He lowered his hat. He started singing saloon songs. Songs about loneliness, loss, and the bottom of the bottle. He wasn't crooning anymore. He was telling the truth. The comeback was legendary. By the late 50s and 60s, Sinatra wasn't just a star. He was the chairman. He conquered Hollywood, Las Vegas, and the world. He had money, power, and the respect of presidents. But as the years turned into decades, a guilt began to gnaw at him. He had saved the world with his music, but he had never thanked the man who gave him the weapon. In 1973, during his retirement period, Frank was sitting in his compound in Palm Springs, looking at old photos. He found a grainy picture of the Hoboken docks. He called Jilly. "I need you to find someone," Frank said, his voice low. "His name is Leo Pellegrino, Hoboken, Monroe Street. Finding a ghost isn't easy." Jilly Rizzo spent weeks digging. The basement on Monroe Street was long gone, demolished to make way for new apartments. The old neighbors were dead or moved to Florida. It seemed like Leo had vanished into the ether of history, but Jilly was relentless. Finally, he found a lead through a musicians' union pension fund that hadn't been claimed in years. It led him to a grim, state-run nursing home in Newark. When Jilly walked into the room, he saw a tiny, frail man in a wheelchair staring out the window at a brick wall. Leo was 91 years old. He was half blind, and his hands, the hands that once played Puccini like an angel, were twisted with arthritis. Jilly approached the bed. "Mr. Pellegrino?" The old man didn't turn. "Mr. Pellegrino, Frank sent me. Frank Sinatra." The old man's head turned slowly. His eyes were cloudy, but a spark of recognition flickered. "Francesco?" he rasped. "The skinny one?" Jilly nodded. "Yeah, the skinny one. He wants to see you." Leo chuckled, a sound like dry leaves. "He's busy. He's the king of the world now." Jilly smiled. "He's never too busy for you." When Jilly called Frank to tell him he'd found him, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then, Frank said, "Get him out of there. Get him the best doctors, get him a suit, and get him to New York. I'm playing the Garden." If you are enjoying this journey through the hidden past of a legend, please take a moment to subscribe for new stories. It really helps us bring these lost moments to life. October 1974, Madison Square Garden. We are back at the beginning. The show was a marathon. Frank was sweating, boxing with the microphone, delivering hit after hit. "The lady is a tramp. I've got you under my skin. My way." The audience was in the palm of his hand, but Frank kept glancing at the front row, stage left. There, sitting in a wheelchair, dressed in a tuxedo that hung loosely on his frail frame, was Leo Pellegrino. The old man looked bewildered by the lights, the noise, the sheer scale of the adoration. He couldn't believe this was the same skinny kid who used to hide in his basement. As the concert neared its end, the orchestra quieted down. The lights dimmed to a single spotlight on Frank. He sat on a stool, lit a cigarette, and took a sip of his drink. The crowd hushed, expecting a joke or a story about the Rat Pack. Frank looked down at his shoes, then looked directly at the section where Leo was sitting. "You know," Frank said, his voice dropping to that intimate, conversational tone that made every person person feel like they were the only one in the room. People ask me where I learned to sing. They talk about Dorsey, they talk about breath control, but they don't know the truth. He paused, smoke curling around his face. I learned to sing in a basement in Hoboken, from a man who taught me that music isn't about the notes you hit. It's about the notes you miss. It's about the pain you can't get rid of. A murmur went through the crowd. Frank stood up and walked to the edge of the stage. That man is here tonight. I haven't seen him in 40 years. I was ashamed, maybe. Maybe I thought I made it on my own. But nobody makes it on their own. Frank pointed a finger at the darkness. Leo Pellegrino. The spotlight swung frantically until it found the old man in the wheelchair. Leo shielded his eyes, looking small and terrified. This man, Frank roared, his voice cracking with emotion, taught me how to tell the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who built this voice. 20,000 people stood up. The applause started as a rumble and turned into a roar. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a wave of love directed at a confused old man who had spent his life in the shadows. Frank jumped off the stage, something he never did, and walked over to the barrier. Security guards panicked, but Frank waved them off. He reached over the railing and grabbed Leo's trembling hand. The cameras zoomed in. The image was broadcast to millions of homes. The untouchable Frank Sinatra, crying, holding the hand of a forgotten piano player. Frank leaned in close to Leo. "Did I do okay, Pops?" he whispered. "Did I hit the silence right?" Leo looked up, his cloudy eyes filling with tears. He squeezed Frank's hand with surprising strength. "You did good, Francesco," he whispered. "You swam underwater." Frank kissed the old man's forehead, then climbed back onto the stage. He turned to the orchestra. "One for my baby," he commanded, "and keep it quiet. Play it for him." The version of One for My Baby that Frank sang that night was unlike any other recording. It wasn't a performance. It was a confession. Every word was heavy with regret, gratitude, and love. When he sang the line, "It's a long, long road," he looked right at Leo. The silence between the notes was deafening. It was the longest, saddest, most beautiful silence Madison Square Garden had ever heard. Before we get to the end of this story, don't forget to subscribe for new stories to join our community of music history lovers. Leo Pellegrino didn't live long after that night. The excitement, the travel, the overwhelming emotion, it was a final burst of life before the end. He passed away in his sleep 3 weeks later in a private room at Mount Sinai Hospital that Frank had paid for. Frank was on tour when he got the news. He didn't cancel the show. He didn't issue a press release. He just went out on stage that night in Chicago, ordered a Jack Daniels, and toasted the empty air. "To the teacher," was all he said. But the story didn't end with a toast. A few months later, a lawyer arrived at the prestigious Juilliard School of Music in New York. He carried a check from the Sinatra family. It was an endowment to start the Pellegrino Scholarship for Piano and Voice, but there was a specific stipulation attached to the money, written in Frank's own handwriting. The scholarship wasn't for the student with the best grades or the best technique. It was to be awarded to the student who understands that the music is about the heart, not the chart. Today, that scholarship still exists. Most students who apply for it have no idea who Leo Pellegrino was. They assume he was some famous Italian conductor or a distant relative of Sinatra. They don't know he was a lonely man in a basement in Hoboken who saw a spark in a scared little boy. They don't know that the phrasing, the breath, the bel canto style that defined the 20th century was saved from extinction in a room that smelled of garlic and damp wood. Frank Sinatra died in 1998, a legend who had lived 1,000 lives. But those who knew him best said that in his final years, when dementia began to steal his memories, he often forgot about the presidents and the movie stars. He forgot about the Rat Pack and the glitz of Vegas, but he would sometimes sit by the window, tapping a rhythm on the arm of his chair, humming a Puccini melody. And if you listened closely, you could hear him whispering to someone who wasn't there. "Am I breathing right, Leo? Is the silence loud enough?" The legacy of a star isn't just in the records they sell or the movies they make. It's in the debts they pay. Frank Sinatra spent a lifetime trying to prove he was the toughest guy in the room. But in the end, his greatest moment wasn't a fight. It was an act of humility. It was acknowledging that even the chairman of the board needed a teacher. It was showing the world that behind the tuxedo, behind the swagger, there was still just a skinny kid from Hoboken, looking for approval from the old man in the basement. And that is the real secret of the voice. It wasn't magic. It was a gift, passed from one broken heart to another, polished in the dark until it shined bright enough to light up the world. So the next time you hear Sinatra sing, listen closely. Don't just listen to the power of the voice. Listen to the quiet moments. Listen to the breath. That's where Leo lives. If you were moved by this story of loyalty and music, please subscribe for new stories. And finally, tell me, who is the Leo in your life? Who is the person who believed in you when you were nothing. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next story. Subscribe for new stories.